The annual Brown Interiors 50th anniversary celebration in Detroit was always a grand affair, but this year felt different. As I sat in the hotel's beautifully decorated conference room watching my 16-year-old daughter Amy check her phone, I caught sight of my ex-husband David rehearsing his acceptance speech for the company's Legacy Award. The irony of him receiving an award for upholding family values wasn't lost on me, especially considering what I had discovered in his messages 20 years ago. My name is Diane Foster, and at 52, I had rebuilt my life after a devastating betrayal, a successful career as an IT systems consultant, a beautiful daughter approaching college age, and hard-earned peace of mind. David was still the golden boy of Brown Interiors, following in his father's footsteps as vice president of operations. Everyone had praised us as the perfect couple back then, and I believed it too, until that morning when his phone buzzed during breakfast. "Mom, why are we even here?" Amy whispered, leaning close to me. Her dark eyes, so much like mine, held a mixture of boredom and curiosity. "I barely know these people." "We're here because your grandfather William specifically asked us to come," I replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my navy dress, the one I'd chosen carefully to project confidence without seeming like I was trying too hard. "This celebration is important to him." What I didn't say was how my stomach had been in knots for weeks after receiving William's invitation. 20 years had passed since I'd attended a Brown family function. 20 years since I'd discovered David's affair with his assistant and his plans to steal company secrets. 20 years of deliberately building a life separate from the Browns, except for the necessary communications regarding Amy. Across the room, my former mother-in-law Elizabeth Brown was holding court, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and society smile exactly as I remembered. She caught my eye and gave a practiced wave before making her way toward us, her expensive perfume announcing her arrival seconds before she reached our table. "Diane, dear," Elizabeth called out, approaching with measured steps. "How wonderful that you could make it. And Amy, my goodness, you're growing into such a beautiful young woman." "Thank you, Mrs. Brown," Amy replied with the polite formality I'd taught her to use with her grandparents. She'd seen them perhaps twice a year at most, carefully orchestrated visits that I endured for her sake. "Is everything to your liking?" Elizabeth asked, her eyes assessing my appearance with the same critical gaze I remembered from decades ago. "William was so pleased when you accepted the invitation." "Everything is lovely," I said, maintaining the civil tone I'd perfected over years of co-parenting with David. "The hotel has done a beautiful job with the celebration." Elizabeth beamed with practiced charm. "We're blessed to have you join us for this milestone." "Amy, dear, has your mother told you about the family scholarship fund? For college? Your grandfather has some wonderful ideas about your future." I felt Amy stiffen beside me. This was exactly what I'd feared, the Browns attempting to exert influence over Amy's future without consulting me. Before I could intervene, William Brown approached, his tall frame still commanding despite his 72 years. "Diane," he said with a nod that conveyed more respect than his son had ever shown me. "I appreciate you coming today. Could I have a word in private before the ceremony begins?" 20 years ago, it had been William who had recognized my IT expertise when his son only saw me as a pretty wife. It had been William who had offered me a way forward after discovering David's betrayal. And now, as I excused myself from the table to follow him to a quiet corner, I wondered what new complication the Brown family was about to introduce into my carefully constructed life. A private conversation, William led me to a small sitting area away from the main celebration, his movements deliberate as he eased himself into a leather armchair. The years had added more lines to his face, but his eyes remained sharp and assessing, the eyes of a businessman who had built Brown Interiors from nothing into one of Detroit's most respected furniture companies. "You look well, Diane," he said, studying me carefully. "Your consulting firm has quite the reputation in the industry now." I straightened my shoulders slightly, a habit formed over decades of proving myself in male-dominated boardrooms. "Thank you. We've been fortunate to work with some excellent clients." William nodded, getting straight to the point as he always had. "I'll be direct. Brown Interiors is facing challenges. The furniture industry has changed dramatically, and our online presence and technological infrastructure are insufficient. A familiar tension crept into my shoulders. And you're telling me this because I'm hoping you might consider consulting for us. His weathered hands rested on his knees as he leaned forward. Your expertise in retail technology systems is exactly what we need. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 years ago, I had discovered David planning to steal company secrets to start his own venture with his assistant Jessica. Now his father was asking for my help to save the very company David had tried to undermine. I don't think that would be appropriate, William. David and I. This isn't about David, he interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. This is about Brown Interior's future, about the employees who depend on our success, and about Amy's inheritance one day. At the mention of my daughter, I felt a familiar protective instinct rise within me. Amy's future is secure. I've made sure of that without any help from the Browns. William's expression softened slightly. I know you have, Diane. You've done an admirable job raising her. But this company is part of her heritage too, whether you like it or not. Before I could respond, a young woman approached us, Jessica Morris, David's current assistant and, if the gossip I'd overheard was accurate, his latest romantic interest. At 35, she was nearly 20 years younger than David, with a perfectly tailored suit and ambition radiating from every pore. Excuse me, Mr. Brown, she said, pointedly ignoring my presence. David is ready to begin the presentation whenever you are. William dismissed her with a curt nod. As Jessica walked away, I caught her glancing back at us with poorly disguised curiosity. Some things never change, I murmured, watching her retreating figure. William's gaze followed mine, his expression unreadable. We should return to the celebration. But Diane, please consider my offer. The board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'd like you to attend as my guest. As we walked back toward the main room, I spotted Amy deep in conversation with her Aunt Sarah, David's younger sister. Sarah had always been kind to me, one of the few Browns who had reached out occasionally over the years. Seeing them together, their heads bent in conversation, I was struck by how much Amy resembled her father in her mannerisms, despite having my coloring and intellect. David was now at the podium, adjusting the microphone, his silver-streaked hair and confident posture still charming the room. As our eyes met briefly across the crowd, I felt an echo of pain I thought I'd long since buried. Not because I still loved him, that had died the moment I'd seen his messages to Jessica 20 years ago, but because of what could have been, what should have been, for Amy's sake. The conference room's AV system was already set up for his presentation, including a large projector screen. As an IT consultant who had designed similar systems for numerous corporate clients, I understood exactly how it worked. The memory of how I'd once used such a system to expose David's betrayal floated to the surface of my mind, but I pushed it away. I had long ago chosen a different path, one of dignity and quiet strength rather than public revenge. Diane dear, Elizabeth called out, approaching again as I returned to my seat. Is everything all right? You look pale. I'm fine, I assured her, watching Amy return to her seat. Just catching up with William about some business matters. Elizabeth smiled, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Business matters? How interesting. William hasn't mentioned any collaborations. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and David took his place at the podium. William stepped up to begin his introduction, speaking about family legacy and the importance of moral character in business. I sat beside Amy, watching my daughter's face as she observed the grandfather she barely knew praise the father who had been largely absent from her life. The Brown name has always stood for integrity, William was saying, his voice filled with pride that seemed at odds with what I knew about his son. And while we've faced challenges, our commitment to quality and family values remains unchanged. Amy leaned over to whisper in my ear. Is that why we only see them twice a year? Because of their commitment to family? I squeezed her hand gently, a silent request for patience. As David stepped forward to accept his award, I couldn't help remembering how differently I had once imagined our lives unfolding, before I discovered the truth about the man I had married. The past resurfaces, David cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as he accepted the Crystal Award from his father. His practiced smile, the same one that had once charmed me 20 years ago, spread across his face as he looked out at the assembled company employees and family members. "Thank you, Father, for those kind words," he began, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd always used in public settings. "It's an honor to accept this award as we celebrate 50 years of Brown Interiors excellence." I watched him carefully, this man who had once been the center of my world. At 54, David was still handsome, though his once dark hair was now streaked with silver and lines had formed around his eyes. He'd aged well externally, but I knew the shallow ambition that lay beneath that polished exterior. "Our company was built on traditional values," David continued, making eye contact with various executives in the room. "Dedication to quality, commitment to employees, and above all, integrity in everything we do." Amy shifted beside me, and I could sense her discomfort. Though I'd never spoken ill of her father, she was perceptive enough to recognize the disconnect between his words and his actions over the years. The missed birthdays, the cancelled visits, the hollow promises. As we move forward into the digital age, David was saying, Brown Interiors remains committed to those core values while embracing innovation. My mind drifted back to that morning 20 years ago. David had left his phone on our hotel room's desk while showering, and I normally wouldn't have looked, but the preview notification caught my eye. "Missing you already. Last night was incredible," from someone named Jessica M., executive assistant. With trembling hands and a tightening knot in my stomach, I'd opened his phone. His password was still our wedding date, something he'd apparently forgotten to change. What I found made my world collapse: hundreds of messages, photos, and plans to start a competing business using stolen Brown Interiors client information, all with Jessica Morris, his new assistant. That was also when I discovered I was pregnant with Amy. Now, watching him speak about integrity, I felt not the burning rage of betrayal that had consumed me 20 years ago, but a quiet sadness for the wasted years and the father Amy had never truly known. My attention was drawn back to the present when Jessica Morris slipped into the room through a side door, speaking quietly into her phone. Something about her furtive movements and the way she kept glancing at David sparked my professional instincts. After 20 years as an IT consultant, I'd developed a sharp eye for suspicious behavior, especially around corporate information. "Mom," Amy whispered, following my gaze. "Isn't that Dad's assistant? The one Aunt Sarah was telling me about?" I nodded slightly, wondering what Sarah might have shared with my daughter. "Yes, that's Jessica Morris." Amy's expression darkened. "Aunt Sarah said she's the reason Dad's hardly ever at family events anymore." She said. She stopped suddenly, looking uncomfortable. "It's okay," I assured her quietly. "You can tell me." Amy hesitated, then leaned closer. She said history repeats itself in the Brown family. That Dad hasn't changed since you two were together. The implication hung between us, and I saw the question in Amy's eyes, one I'd managed to avoid for 16 years by crafting a sanitized version of our divorce. I'd told her only that her father and I had grown apart, that sometimes people just weren't meant to stay together. I'd never mentioned the betrayal, the business scheme, or how William had offered me a way out with dignity. "There's a lot about that time that I've never shared with you," I admitted softly. "I wanted to protect you from things that might color your relationship with your father." "I'm not a child anymore, Mom," Amy replied, a hint of her teenage assertiveness surfacing. "I'm applying to colleges next year. Don't you think I deserve to know the truth about my own family?" Before I could respond, the hotel's sophisticated sound system crackled slightly, and Jessica's voice suddenly filled the room, cutting across David's speech. "Told you I'm handling it," her voice projected clearly through the speakers. She was apparently unaware that her phone call was being broadcast through the AV system, likely because she'd accidentally connected to the Bluetooth audio when she entered the room. "Yes, I've already copied the client list and pricing models. Once David finalizes the deal with the Chinese manufacturer, we can move forward with our own lineup." The room fell into shocked silence. David froze at the podium, his face draining of color as he stared at Jessica, who was still speaking, oblivious to the fact that everyone could hear her. By the time Old Man Brown realizes what's happening, will have already approached their top 10 clients, she continued. David's got them all wrapped around his finger with this family legacy nonsense. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu wash over me. 20 years later, and David was still the same man, making the same mistakes, betraying his family in the same way. My eyes met William's across the room, and I saw the pain and anger on his face as he realized his son was once again planning to undermine the family business. Jessica finally noticed the silence in the room and looked up, her eyes widening with horror as she realized what had happened. She quickly ended her call, but the damage was done. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Technology had exposed David's betrayal once again, though this time it was pure coincidence rather than my deliberate action. David, William's voice cut through the silence, cold and commanding. My office. Now. As David stumbled away from the podium, his eyes met mine briefly. I saw recognition there. He knew I understood exactly what was happening because he'd done it before, to me. With a slight nod of acknowledgement, I remained seated, my hand covering Amy's as she processed what she'd just witnessed. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Was this what happened with you and Dad too?" The moment of truth had arrived, not through my planning but through David's own repeated mistakes. Looking into my daughter's confused eyes, I knew it was time to finally share the complete story of our past. The truth revealed, the next morning, I sat in my hotel room with Amy, both of us nursing cups of coffee as sunlight filtered through the curtains. After the chaos of the previous evening, William had quickly ended the celebration, and hotel staff had efficiently ushered guests out while the Brown family retreated to deal with their latest crisis. I had taken Amy back to our room, knowing she had questions I could no longer avoid. "So that's why we left Detroit," Amy said quietly, piecing together the fragments of family history I'd finally shared with her. "Not just because of your job offer in Chicago." I nodded, watching her process 20 years of carefully filtered family history. "The job offer came after, because of my work helping protect Brown Interior Systems after I discovered what your father and his assistant were planning." Amy set her cup down, her hand slightly unsteady. At 16, she had her father's determined chin and my analytical mind, a combination that made her both perceptive and forthright. All these years, I thought Dad was just busy. Too busy for regular visits, too busy to come to my recitals. Her voice held the hurt of a child who had constructed elaborate excuses for an absent parent. But he was just self-centered, wasn't he? Like he is now with this Jessica person. I chose my words carefully, the habit of 2 decades. Your father has always been ambitious. The company, his image in the industry, those have always come first for him. But you never told me, Amy said, a hint of accusation in her tone. You let me believe this fairy tale that you just grew apart. You let me make excuses for him. I wanted you to form your own relationship with your father, without my history coloring your perspective, I explained, reaching for her hand across the small table. Maybe that was wrong, but I thought I was protecting you. Amy pulled her hand away, standing to pace the room. Protecting me? By hiding the truth? Mom, I've spent years wondering what was wrong with me, why Dad never seemed to want to be part of my life. I thought it was something I did. Her words struck me like a physical blow. In my determination to take the high road, to never speak ill of David, I had inadvertently let my daughter believe she was somehow at fault for her father's absence. Amy, no, I said, standing to face her. Nothing was ever your fault. Your father's choices, both then and now, were about his own selfish desires, not about you or me. A knock at the door interrupted us. I opened it to find Carol Lee, my longtime friend and attorney, standing in the hallway. Her practical suit and no-nonsense expression were exactly what I needed in that moment. I came as soon as I got your message, Carol said, stepping inside and giving Amy a warm hug. Quite the dramatic evening, from what you told me. Aunt Carol, Amy said, using the honorary title she'd given my friend years ago. Did you know about all this too? About what Dad did to Mom? Carol glanced at me, silently asking how much I'd shared. When I nodded, she turned back to Amy. I did, she admitted. I was your mother's attorney during the divorce. But like your mom, I believed it was her story to tell when the time was right. Amy crossed her arms, the gesture so reminiscent of how I'd stood my ground in difficult situations that I nearly smiled despite the tension. "Well, the time is now," she declared. "I want to know everything. No more protecting me." My phone rang. William Brown's name appeared on the screen. With a quick apology to Amy and Carol, I answered. "Diane," William's voice sounded tired but resolute. "The board is assembling in an hour. I'd still like you to attend, if you're willing." I glanced at Amy, who was watching me intently. "William, I appreciate the invitation, but given what happened last night," "Because of what happened last night," he interrupted, "we need your expertise more than ever. David has been temporarily relieved of his duties while we investigate. Jessica Morris has already been terminated." The parallels to 20 years ago were striking, though this time the exposure had been accidental rather than my deliberate action. "I'll attend the meeting," I decided, "but only if Amy can come with me. She deserves to understand her family legacy, all of it, not just the polished version David presents." After a brief hesitation, William agreed. As I ended the call, Amy looked at me with newfound respect. "You're really going to help them? After everything?" I smiled at my daughter, seeing in her face the strength and intelligence that would carry her far beyond the family drama she'd been born into. "The company employs hundreds of people who had nothing to do with your father's actions," I explained. "And whether we like it or not, Brown Interiors is part of your heritage." Carol nodded approvingly. "Besides, there's nothing quite like proving your worth to people who once underestimated you." An hour later, we walked into Brown Interiors' elegant boardroom, where somber-faced executives sat around a massive table. Elizabeth Brown was there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her perfect composure finally cracked by her son's public disgrace. Sarah, David's sister, gave me a small smile of solidarity as we entered. William stood at the head of the table, his authority undiminished despite the family crisis. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, we face an unprecedented situation." His eyes met mine as I took a seat, Amy beside me. "We also have an opportunity to address long-standing issues with our technological infrastructure and online presence. To that end, I've invited Diane Foster, a leading IT systems consultant, to join us today." Several board members exchanged glances, clearly recognizing my name and connection to the family. "Some of you may remember Ms. Foster as David's former wife," William continued, his tone leaving no room for gossip. "What you may not know is that she has built one of the Midwest's most respected IT consulting firms over the past 15 years, specializing in retail systems modernization." As William invited me to present my initial assessment of Brown Interiors' technology needs, I felt Amy's proud gaze on me. The conference room was the same one where I had once sat quietly as David's wife, my expertise dismissed. Now I stood at the podium, my experience and knowledge commanding the respect of the entire board. The path that had led me back to this room was not one I would have chosen, but standing there, sharing my vision for how Brown Interiors could modernize its operations for the digital age, I realized that the painful past had forged something valuable after all, not just my career, but the strength to face the Browns on my own terms, with my daughter bearing witness to her mother's hard-won expertise. Confrontation and resolution. After my presentation, the boardroom filled with questions about digital transformation, cloud-based inventory systems, and online customer experience. Professional inquiries that had nothing to do with my past with the Brown family. I answered each one with the confidence earned through years of successful projects, aware of Amy watching me with new understanding in her eyes. "This implementation timeline seems aggressive," one executive commented, reviewing the proposal I'd outlined. "Can it really be accomplished in 6 months? My team has completed similar projects for 3 major furniture retailers in the past 2 years, I replied, standing my ground with the assurance that came from decades of expertise. With proper resources and commitment, yes, it's entirely achievable. As the meeting drew to a close, William asked me to stay behind, along with Amy and the core family members on the board. Once the room had cleared of non-family executives, the atmosphere shifted from professional to personal. "I believe we need to address the elephant in the room," Elizabeth said, her voice steadier than her slightly trembling hands. David has put this company in jeopardy, again. She looked directly at me for the first time. Diane, I owe you an apology. 20 years ago, I didn't believe what you told us about David's plans. I convinced myself you were exaggerating to get a better divorce settlement. The admission stunned me. For years, I'd assumed the entire Brown family had closed ranks around David, despite the evidence I'd provided to William. Mother didn't tell me either, Sarah added, giving me a sad smile. I only learned the full story a few years ago when I found the original investigation file in Father's office. William cleared his throat, looking every one of his 72 years. David is my son, and I love him. But this company was built on principles he clearly doesn't share. He turned to Amy, who sat straight-backed beside me. Your mother showed remarkable restraint and dignity 20 years ago. She could have publicly exposed your father's actions, but she chose a quieter path, partly, I believe, to protect your relationship with him. Amy's hand found mine under the table, a silent acknowledgement of what my silence had cost me over the years. David is currently with our legal team, William continued. Jessica Morris apparently left the hotel last night with company data. We're pursuing all available measures to contain the damage. Where does this leave us? I asked, focusing on the practical next steps rather than dwelling on old wounds. If you want my firm to implement the systems overhaul, we'll need full access and authority. William nodded decisively. I'm proposing to the board that we retain your company as our primary technology consultant, with you personally overseeing the digital transformation project. He paused, looking significantly at Elizabeth and Sarah before continuing. Additionally, I believe it's time for fresh perspectives on our board. I'd like to nominate you for a board position, Diane. Elizabeth gasped softly, while Sarah broke into a genuine smile. A board position? I echoed, momentarily caught off guard. This was far beyond the consulting arrangement I'd anticipated. You understand both our business and the technology landscape we need to navigate, William explained. More importantly, you've demonstrated integrity under difficult circumstances, exactly what Brown Interiors needs right now. Before I could respond, the boardroom door opened and David stormed in, his face flushed with anger. He stopped short when he saw all of us gathered there. A family meeting without me? He asked, his voice tightly controlled but with fury simmering beneath. His eyes landed on Amy, then narrowed as he noticed our joined hands. I see you've been sharing your version of history. There's only one version, David, William replied firmly. The same pattern we saw 20 years ago with Diane, we're seeing now with Jessica Morris. David's gaze shifted to me, a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame crossing his features. You must be enjoying this, he said bitterly. 20 years of waiting for your revenge. I felt Amy tense beside me, but I kept my voice calm. This isn't about revenge, David. It never was. I moved on with my life and built something I'm proud of. I've been invited here to help salvage what your actions have put at risk, again. David, Elizabeth interjected, her social polish cracking to reveal raw maternal disappointment. Jessica Morris has been caught trying to access our client database remotely. The IT team has already traced the attempt to her home computer. David's confident facade crumbled slightly. She was just helping me prepare for client meetings. At midnight, after being terminated? Sarah asked skeptically. The same Jessica who was overheard discussing taking Brown clients to a competing venture. Amy stood suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. I've spent my whole life making excuses for why you were never there, Dad. Mom never said a bad word about you, even when I'd cry because you missed another school event or canceled another visit. Her voice was steady, but I could see the emotion she was controlling. I thought I wasn't important enough. But that wasn't it, was it? You were just selfish. David looked genuinely shocked at his daughter's words, perhaps never having considered how his actions appeared through her eyes. Amy, that's not fair. I've always provided for you, money isn't parenting, she cut him off. Mom was there. Every day, every night, every game and recital and parent-teacher conference. She built her business while never missing what mattered to me. And I never knew until last night that you tried to hurt her the same way you're hurting the company now. The room fell silent as David absorbed his daughter's words. For perhaps the first time, I saw him truly affected by the consequences of his actions, not the legal or financial ramifications, but the human cost, written clearly on his daughter's face. William was the first to speak. David, the board will be voting tomorrow on your continued role with the company. Until then, you're suspended from all duties and access. Please surrender your company devices to security on your way out. David looked around the table, perhaps seeking an ally, but found none. With a final glare at me, he walked out, leaving behind the lingering question of whether this time, finally, he would face real consequences for his actions. Elizabeth sighed deeply once he'd gone. All these years, protecting the family image, and for what? She turned to Amy with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry we weren't the grandparents you deserved, dear. We were so busy preserving the appearance of the perfect family that we failed to see what really mattered. Amy's expression softened slightly. I'd like to know my grandparents better, she said carefully. The real ones, not just the twice-a-year formal visit versions. William smiled at his granddaughter with genuine warmth. We'd like that very much. He turned to me. Diane, regarding the board position, I need time to consider it, I said honestly. This is all happening very quickly, and my primary focus has always been Amy's well-being. Mom, Amy said, with the clear-eyed wisdom that sometimes made her seem older than her 16 years, I think you should do it. Not just for Brown Interiors, but for yourself. You've earned this. Looking around the table at the Browns, my former family, Amy's blood relatives, and now potentially my business associates, I realized that life had brought me full circle. Not for revenge, as David had suggested, but perhaps for resolution, both for myself and for my daughter. I'll consider the board position, I told William, on one condition. Amy's college fund needs to be independent of any Brown family politics or business decisions. Her future is non-negotiable. William nodded solemnly. I've already instructed our attorneys to establish a trust in her name, completely separate from company affairs or David's position. As we concluded the meeting, Sarah approached me, her expression serious. He's still my brother, and I still love him, she said quietly. But what you did for Amy all these years, never poisoning her against him despite what happened, that shows remarkable character, Diane. I glanced at Amy, who was accepting Elizabeth's tentative hug. I did what I thought was right for her. Maybe not always perfectly, but with the best intentions. Sometimes that's all any of us can do, Sarah replied, watching her niece with affection. And sometimes, it's enough. New beginnings. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office at Brown Interiors headquarters, reviewing the quarterly results of our digital transformation project. The view of Detroit's skyline spread before me, so different from my Chicago office but becoming increasingly familiar as I split my time between the two cities. The changes we'd implemented were already showing impressive results: online sales up 32%, inventory management costs down 18%, and customer satisfaction scores climbing steadily. On my desk sat the latest issue of Furniture Today magazine with a feature article titled Brown Interiors Digital Renaissance: How a Family Company Reinvented Itself for the 21st Century. Amy's photograph sat prominently on my desk, her recent senior portrait, capturing her confidence as she prepared for college next fall. She'd been accepted to 3 top universities and was leaning toward Northwestern's computer science program, a choice that made me both proud and slightly nostalgic. My daughter was following in my professional footsteps while charting her own course. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. The board members are gathering for the quarterly meeting, Maria, my assistant, announced. And your 4 o'clock with the web development team is confirmed. Thank you, Maria, I replied, gathering my presentation materials. And has Carol confirmed for dinner tonight? Yes, she'll meet you and Amy at the restaurant at 7. Maria smiled. Also, Ms. Brown, Sarah, asked if you could spare a few minutes before the board meeting. I nodded, checking my watch. The past 6 months had transformed my relationship with the Brown family in ways I never could have anticipated. Sarah had become something of an ally, William a respected mentor, and even Elizabeth had softened considerably, especially in her relationship with Amy. As for David, The situation had resolved with less drama than expected. After the evidence of his planned corporate espionage became irrefutable, he had accepted a generous severance package in exchange for his shares and a non-compete agreement. Last I'd heard from Amy, who maintained limited contact with him, he had moved to Florida and was dating a real estate agent there. I made my way to the small conference room where Sarah waited, her elegant figure silhouetted against the window. At 48, she had stepped up to take a more active role in the company since David's departure, revealing a business acumen that had previously been overshadowed by her brother. "Diane," she greeted me warmly. "The numbers look fantastic. The board is positively giddy." "The team has done impressive work," I acknowledged. "Your design department's collaboration with the tech group has been particularly effective." Sarah nodded, but her expression suggested she had something more personal to discuss. "I wanted to catch you before the meeting because," she hesitated. "David called yesterday. He's heard about our success through industry channels, and about your role in it." I felt a flicker of tension but kept my expression neutral. "Did he have something specific to say?" "He wanted to know if you'd orchestrated his downfall," Sarah said with a sad smile. "If you'd been working behind the scenes all these years, planning your revenge." The irony nearly made me laugh. 20 years building my own business, raising our daughter, creating a life completely separate from the Browns, that would be quite the long game. "That's essentially what I told him," Sarah replied. "But he's always needed someone else to blame for his failures." She hesitated again. "He also asked about Amy's college decision." "He could ask her directly," I pointed out. "She has a phone." Sarah nodded. I suggested the same. "He said he'd try to call her this weekend." She studied me carefully. "It still amazes me, how you've managed to help Amy maintain some relationship with him, despite everything." I thought about the complex balance I'd tried to strike over the years, protecting Amy while allowing her to form her own opinions about her father. She deserves to make her own choices about her relationship with David. I've tried not to get in the way of that. "Well, it speaks volumes that she's chosen to spend her school breaks here with you, even when you're working," Sarah observed. "She's become quite popular with the design interns, by the way. Elizabeth is convinced she'll eventually join the company." "Amy will follow her own path," I said confidently. "But I appreciate how welcoming everyone has been to her." As we walked together toward the boardroom, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken. When I'd attended the 50th anniversary celebration 6 months ago, I'd been determined to maintain the careful distance I'd established from the Brown family. Now I was helping lead their company into a new era, collaborating with people I'd once thought I'd never willingly speak to again. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces when we entered. William, still commanding respect at the head of the table despite having stepped back from day-to-day operations. Elizabeth, more relaxed than I'd ever seen her, now focusing her social skills on charitable foundations rather than maintaining appearances. The other board members, once David's allies or indifferent to me, now valued colleagues. As the meeting began and I presented the quarterly results, I could feel the satisfaction of having proven my worth not through revenge or manipulation, but through genuine expertise and hard work. The young bride whose contributions had been dismissed 20 years ago was now a respected leader helping to secure the company's future, and by extension, part of Amy's inheritance. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find Amy waiting, her laptop open on the small conference table where she sometimes studied when visiting me at work. "How was school?" I asked, noting the subtle highlights in her hair and new addition since the weekend. "Boring," she replied with the typical teenage dismissal. "But I aced my calculus test." She closed her laptop and regarded me curiously. "Grandma called. She wants us to come for dinner Sunday before we head back to Chicago. She mentioned something about Dad calling her too." I kept my expression neutral, letting Amy lead the conversation about her father as I always had. "Are you comfortable with that?" Amy considered the question seriously, another sign of the maturity that had blossomed in her over the past months. "I think so. It's weird, but since everything happened, it's actually been easier to talk to him. Like the pressure of pretending everything was perfect is gone." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The exposure of David's deception had been painful but had ultimately brought a kind of clarity to all our relationships. "Mom," Amy said suddenly, "are you happy? With how everything turned out, I mean. With being back involved with the Browns after everything they put you through." The question caught me off guard with its directness. I sat down beside my daughter, considering my answer carefully. "I'm content with where I am," I told her honestly. 20 years ago, I was devastated by your father's betrayal, but that painful experience ultimately led me to build a successful business and raise an amazing daughter." I smiled at her. Coming back here wasn't about the Browns, really. It was about recognizing an opportunity to do work I'm good at, and perhaps to close some old chapters in a way that feels right. Amy nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. "Well, for what it's worth, I think Grandpa William was right. The company needed you. And maybe you needed this too, to come back on your own terms." As we gathered our things to leave for dinner with Carol, I glanced around my office, a tangible symbol of how life could come full circle in unexpected ways. The betrayal that had once shattered my world had ultimately led me to greater strength, independence, and now, a resolution I could never have foreseen. "Ready to go?" Amy asked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I nodded, turning off my desk lamp. Ready. 20 years ago, I had walked away from Brown Interiors with a broken heart and an uncertain future. Now I walked out with my daughter beside me, secure in the knowledge that we had both found our places in this complicated family landscape, not through revenge or bitterness, but through resilience, integrity, and the courage to embrace unexpected new beginnings.